Hello and welcome back to part 2 of the Whiteley alleged forgery scandal that rocked the Australian art market in the 2010s. If you haven't listened to part 1, please do so before you jump into this episode, as there's a lot of context that's necessary for this episode, where we will dive straight into the decade-long police investigation and the court cases that have been the main reason why I have to say allegedly throughout both episodes, so that I can avoid getting sued, you know. As always, this is RJ, your intrepid host, from the newly rebranded Art Crime with RJ, trying to detangle the web of confessions, lies, and professional testimonies to bring you these complicated stories. For the recreation this month, I'm going back to my AS level in critical and contextual art, which is basically A-level art with essays for schools that have an art and design department but no art historians, with some spray painting and stenciling. When I used this medium previously, it was to discuss art as a form of protest, taking heavy inspiration from Banksy's spray stencil practice, so I'm excited to get outside and spray paint once again. I'll be attempting Big Blue Lavender Bay with this style, so we shall see how it goes. This episode will definitely be longer than last month's, as there is a lot of information to cover in the court case with several expert and witness testimonies to digest that bring new information to the table. However, before we dive into that, let's do a very quick recap on some of our key players and the story so far. As you will hopefully remember from episode 1, there were 3 questionable Whiteley works potentially made by Aman Sadiq at Victoria Art Conservation in Melbourne, Australia, that had made their way into the art market through art dealer Peter Gant. Big Blue Lavender Bay, a large blue scene that went from Gant to dealer Anita Archer and her client Andrew Predham for 2.5 million Australian dollars. Orange Lavender Bay, a large orange scene that went from Gant to dealer John Playfoot to dealer Andrew Crawford, ending with small-time dealer and luxury car salesman Stephen Nastetsky for 1.1 million Australian dollars. And Lavender Bay Through the Window, a window scene that was owned by Guy Angwin in lieu of loan repayments from Gant that has since gone missing after it was returned back to him. All 3 of these works became questionable pieces after Nastetsky tried to sell his work a month after purchase, and led to all 3 works slowly being returned to Gant. Although both collectors attempted to get their money back from both of their middlemen dealers, Archer and Crawford, Peter Gant, who had originally received the bulk of the profits from both sales, never paid either of these dealers back, still profiting off of the works. So now that we've looked at how the artworks made their way through the art market, made a killer profit for Gant, were largely known in the art market of Australia as forgeries or inauthentic works, and ended up back with Gant once again, let's see how the police handled their investigation and how it played out in the courts. As with the last episode, most of this research is from Gabriela Kolchewicz's book Whiteley on Trial, so let's begin the journey to an acquittal. Rather than focusing their investigation on the man making all the money, the police continue to investigate Aman Sadiq for his involvement in potentially making forgeries. In July of 2010, Guy Morel once again met with Detective MacDonald and gave him a CD labelled Origins of Art, which contained all of the photos that he had taken of the locked stockroom at Victoria Art Conservation. And then from what I can gather from Kolchewicz's book, everything went quiet on the case for 3 years until the 16th of May 2013, when Detective Senior Constable Justin Stefanik became interested in the case and helped to continue the investigation. Although most of the Australian art market had rejected both Orange Lavender Bay and Big Blue Lavender Bay as potential forgeries and therefore risky investments, this did not stop Gant trying to shift these works onto more naive collectors within the market. This is exactly what happened in August of 2013, when Gant resold Orange Lavender Bay to Stephen Drake, an engineer, for the discounted price of 122,000 Australian dollars. Drake, in his naivety or over-enthusiastic capitalist brain, was hoping that he would make a fortune on the work when he believed the art market and media would change their minds and pronounce it as an authentic Whiteley. This situation is unfortunately not uncommon in the art world, as some people that are more focused on profit than enjoyment of an artwork are exploited by dealers, galleries, other collectors and forgers, obviously, into buying up works that they think will be proven true in the end in hopes of making a significant profit on their investment. This, however, was not the truth in this case. After a year of more intense investigation, on the 5th of March 2014, 4 police officers arrested Sadiq at his Melbourne home for a 4.5 million Australian dollar art fraud case involving 3 Brett Whiteley style paintings. His house was then searched by the police, advised by Robyn Sloggett from the University of Melbourne's Centre for Cultural Materials Conservation, who led them to seize 13 Howard Arkley-style paintings, spray gun equipment, colour mixes and batches from his home studio, and 3 pieces of Lichtenstein-esque frames and some Charles Blacksman-style painting from his business property. Afterwards, he was taken to a police station, interviewed and released, at which point he phoned Judge Wimhurst, his former employee, told him that bad things might be said about him and that the police might call him, pleading for him to tell the truth. The next day, Peter Gant was arrested in Geelong, interviewed for 2 hours and had his house searched. However, nothing was seized. The case was eventually brought to trial in 2016, and this is where the law and the art market begin to diverge in their opinions on forgery cases and what can be deemed as evidence, which I briefly want to explore. Most art market issues that end up going to trial happen in civil court. They are usually between a buyer and a seller discussing issues of fraud or forgery and trying to get their money back or damages. For art fraud to end up in a criminal court, it usually has to be some form of big forgery production enterprise or as part of other organised crime, such as threats or acts of violence, immense damage to property, burglary or for money laundering. Although this case technically falls into the secondary category, as the police have caught an organised production that is estimated to have made millions off of the sale of potential fakes, as we shall see, it can be incredibly hard to prosecute such cases if individuals of the law that are involved, such as the lawyers, judges and juries, don't have a thorough understanding of how art authentication works, or if the experts that are brought in to testify can't give evidence that proves beyond a reasonable doubt. These cases are also very difficult, as the prosecution is solely responsible for the burden of proof that the works aren't real in these cases, whilst the defence's sole responsibility is to diminish the prosecution's evidence, not prove the works are real. This creates an uphill battle for the prosecution, and as we shall see in this trial, not one that they can always win. The committal hearing. A committal hearing for the trial began in March of 2015, where several witnesses were pulled forward to give statements for the prosecution and for a magistrate to consider whether there was sufficient evidence for a jury to find them guilty. This doesn't necessarily mean they will, just that if they did, there is enough evidence to legally back the decision. I'll quickly go through the key individuals that were brought forward and their evidence, as some of it will be reused later in the jury trial or is good to keep in mind. I may also pose some of my own questions that were not asked or answered in the trial. First up is Antonio Rincon, Brett Lichtenstein's frame-making protege and the only other person in Australia that makes the very distinctive and difficult water-gilded Lichtenstein-esque frames. Rincon states that he made 3 frames for Sadiq and can only confirm that 1 is on Big Blue Lavender Bay, 1 is not on Orange Lavender Bay, and that he hasn't seen the missing painting so can't confirm its frame. From this, Sadiq's lawyer Robert Richter presented his theory that Rincon's frames are on Big Blue Lavender Bay, a confirmed 1975 Whiteley, Baudelaire's Drive, that was reframed by Sadiq, and on Gant's confirmed Whiteley, View from the Sitting Room Window, Lavender Bay. In my opinion, this leaves a few mysteries. 1. Where is the original frame for View from the Sitting Room Window, Lavender Bay? 2. Did it end up on Lavender Bay through the window, the missing possible forgery? And 3. If so, was it put on it for authenticity purposes? This theory is questionable, however, as Lichtenstein in an interview with Crawford said that when he was invited to view the work by Angwin, who he knew from frequenting his Melbourne cafe, he did not recognise the frame on the work. So if the missing work didn't have an original Lichtenstein frame, is it a Rincon? Somebody else's? And where does that leave the original frame from View from the Sitting Room Window, Lavender Bay, if it hasn't been destroyed? Next up was Guy Morel, Sadiq's employee and paper conservationist. His statement discussed how he collected his photographic evidence, why he got the police involved, and why he wanted to stay anonymous, which was apparently due to his fear of Sadiq's temper and possible professional ramifications that might occur from testifying in court. In rebuttal, the defence questioned Morel's potential involvement in the forgery through his authentication of the catalogue, a private affair, which Sadiq asked him to do in September of 2010, which was subsequently used as provenance during the sale of Orange Lavender Bay. Morel's report states that lithographic printing was used to produce the catalogue, which was the main printing process used before digital printing was invented and popularised in the 1990s. However, he argues that lithography can still be used today and that a paper test would have been needed to prove that it was of the right age, which he did not do. The defence believed that this was great evidence against the prosecution's argument, as it created doubt about Morel's role as a key witness and the validity of his photographs if he was potentially involved and profiting from the production of these forgeries. However, I have some theories as to why Morel may have gone through with the catalogue authentication. The first thing to consider is that this was his job, and if he was still trying to collect evidence for the police, it's possible he didn't want to refuse Sadiq and lose his job, and thus access to the scene of a potential crime. Secondly, as from Morel's perspective, the report was not thoroughly researched. It could be argued that he felt that Sadiq would manipulate the report to suit his needs, no matter what Morel wrote, which is technically what Gant and Playfoot did to close the sale of Orange Lavender Bay. My final theory, although arguably naive, is that Morel didn't know what the catalogue was for. But if he had managed to discover an alleged forgery ring, I think he would have figured out a piece of fake provenance. Thirdly, we have Richard Simon from Door Impressions, who delivered the doors that were supposedly used for these works in August of 2007. He remembered the batch firstly because they were odd sizes, and because Sadiq complained about the quality of the doors. Due to their non-standard size, the doors had to be made from several cuttings of wood stitched together, leaving visible seams, which was an issue for Sadiq. Simon argued with Sadiq, stating that large doors needed the seams to be put together and he knew what he was getting when he ordered them. In response, Simon states that Sadiq said, and I quote, "The artwork to be painted on these doors is worth over $1 million. I can't have joins." End quote. Although this statement and the interaction was strange, Simon states that he has had stranger demands, like hanging doors upside down, and that he had no idea until at the hearing that Brett Whiteley painted on doors or what Sadiq would be painting on them. With foresight, Sadiq's statements seem incredibly weird in the moment, and even fishier in the context of the prosecution's arguments. However, the defence argued that there is no proof that this conversation happened, leading it to be excluded from Simon's jury trial testimony in 2016. Next up was Rosemary Milburn, who was a part-time gallery assistant for Gant back in 1988 to 1989, when the consignment note for the 3 suspect Whiteleys from his gallery was apparently created. Whilst on the stand, Milburn was asked to look over the consignment book from the 28th of June 1988 to identify if it was her signature and handwriting on the page and if she remembered the works. She states that she remembers the works arriving and signing for them, and that the 2 suspect works in the courtroom could be the ones she took delivery of from Grace Fine Art, but due to the 25-year time gap, she can't say for sure. In discussing the consignment book, the prosecution questioned why there were inconsistencies in the list numbering and the painting dimensions of the Whiteley consignment in comparison with other consignments on the page and in the rest of the book. Milburn, unsurprisingly, did not have an answer. Secondly, they asked what the term "sent out" meant on the notes for consignments to other galleries, which Milburn stated meant that the works had gone to other galleries, but that the "sent out" statement written on the Whiteley consignment was for them coming in. However, she changed her opinion to say that the "sent out" note meant she had sent out the consignment paper to Grace Fine Arts to confirm that they had received the works from them. Unsurprisingly, the magistrate, as well as Kolchevich, were unconvinced by this statement, so Milburn tried to argue that the whole book was an in-book for all of the deliveries and that "sent out" was in reference to consignment receipts, not the works leaving. I find this testimony incredibly suspicious, and if I was on the jury, I would not believe a word of what she has said, seeing as she has changed her story several times to suit the prosecution's questions. The prosecution then started to bring forward their experts on Whiteley and the artwork's authenticity. Firstly, they brought forward Wendy Whiteley, the ex-wife of the artist. She upholds that the 2 works that she had seen are definitely fakes, that they look dead, and that you'd be an idiot to think that they were real. Sadiq's lawyer, however, tried to question her knowledge of the artist, stating that her assertions were nothing more than an opinion. In response, Wendy said, quote, "My opinion is based on 50 years of experience with the artist, his work, a great deal of knowledge and time spent looking at other painters' works in art galleries, all of which you've never done in your life." End quote. Which was probably a little bit too sassy for the stand. Sadiq's lawyer also tried to criticise her assertion of the work being a forgery, highlighting that if the A Private Affair catalogue was proven to be authentic, Orange Lavender Bay, which is featured inside, must be real too, which would make Wendy's opinion largely void. Their second expert was Robyn Sloggett, the conservator that tested both works in 2010. Although in her expert opinion she believed neither of them were Whiteley's, Siddique's lawyer argued that her opinion wasn't reliable, as he felt that her qualifications were not based in hard sciences, that her work was dubious, a pseudoscience, and that her results could not be trusted unless she could find some hard scientific evidence, like through pigment testing. Quickly, I will go through the research that she performed and discussed in court. In this committal trial, she notably discussed, alongside other more technical research, that she performed one pigment test, which is not something that can solely confirm or deny the authenticity of a work. She looked at points of identification in the artworks, such as the way the paint was applied, its style, and paint solubility, which she felt were not consistent with Whiteley works. The solubility test that she performed with the mild solvent, white spirit, in her opinion showed oil paint that did not react how 20-year-old paint should react, as more recent paint is going to be softer, like they found, than older paint which has had time for evaporation and cross-linking to occur. And finally, that whilst looking at Big Blue Lavender Bay, she found paint on the frame, suggesting that the artwork had been placed in the frame whilst it was still wet. The defence, however, argued that solubility testing was not a perfect test, as paint is unpredictable and that 200-year-old paints could present similar results under the right conditions. They also argued that these tests needed to be reproduced by a different lab in the same way to be conclusive, and questioned if she still had the cotton swabs and paint samples for this to happen. However, the most damaging point that they felt they could make was that her team had missed the Whiteley signature on Big Blue Lavender Bay, which was a white signature on the white pier, and that her assessment should not be trusted if she could miss such an obvious component. As Kolchevich neatly summarises, quote, "In the end though, Sloggett accepted that the best that she could say was that on the balance of probabilities, the two paintings could not be attributed to Whiteley at this time," end quote, leading to the idea that further testing on the artworks or the provenance may be needed to prove in a court of law that the artworks were forgeries, even if this level of research may not be necessary within the art market. The last individual to give evidence at the committal hearings was Jeremy James, who, as a witness for the defence, swore that he had photographed Orange Lavender Bay in 1989 for the A Private Affair catalogue for his father's printing business. Although he didn't think he would have proof of the catalogue, as Kenneth James Printing closed down in 2004 and only had to keep 7 years worth of records, he says he remembers this catalogue because it was the first one he did for Peter Gant Fine Art, and because of the distinct size and colour of the artwork. As he is not an expert in art or on Brett Whiteley, he admitted that he couldn't say with any authority that it is a Whiteley, only that he photographed something like that in 1989 and that he hasn't seen the painting since. He is also unsure if they definitely printed the catalogue, as he only saw them again if something went wrong, but it looks like something they would have printed at the time. In the end, the defence asked if he would look for any remnants of the catalogue within his records, and if he did find anything, to bring it forward to the police, which he promised to do. On the 10th of April 2015, 3 weeks after the committal hearing, Magistrate Suzanne Cameron presented her findings, believing there was enough evidence from Morel's photographs, the doors sent to Siddique's business, the purchase of frames from Rincon, Wendy's consistent argument about the authenticity of the works, the findings of Sloggett, which will go into further detail in the trial, and the inconsistencies in the provenance stories to send the case to a jury trial. She also did not believe that there was enough evidence to support the defence's theory that Siddique was making copies of works, seeing as for a true copy to be made, an original had to exist, which there isn't known to be for any of these works, and that the level of underdrawing used within these works is questionable if they were truly created as copies. In my opinion, that seems like a lot of extra work for no reason if you are selling them at copy prices. The jury trial, Day 1. So now we jump ahead to April 2016 to the jury trial. In this section, more detail will be discussed about some of the testimonies of key individuals and more will be brought forward. Please work on the assumption that everything we heard at the committal trial is also in some way discussed here, but if there are any testimonials that are struck from the record, I will let you know at that point. On the 4th of April 2016, the trial started with a week of pre-trial hearings, mainly concerning prejudicial issues against the defendants, such as Gant's previous record being available on the court website, which could obviously be prejudicial, and the glass screens in the courtroom being removed from in front of Gant and Sadiq, which have been known to increase guilty bias in jury cases. On the 11th of April 2016, the case officially started with a 12-person jury with 2 spares, ready for a 5-week trial. The prosecution made 3 charges of financial advantage through deception against Gant and Sadiq for: firstly, the 2.5 million Australian dollar sale of Big Blue Lavender Bay to Andrew Preedham; 2, the attempted 950,000 Australian dollar sale of Lavender Bay through the window to Ralph Hobbs; and thirdly, the 1.1 million Australian dollar sale of Orange Lavender Bay to Stephen Nastetsky. Gant was also charged with 2 extra counts for 4, giving Lavender Bay through the window to Guy Angwin as security for an unpaid loan, and 5, selling Orange Lavender Bay to Stephen Drake for 122,000 Australian dollars. The prosecution started the trial with their timeline of events for the creation and sale of the works that I covered in more depth in the last episode, intersected with the timeline of evidence collection by Morel and the supply orders by Sadiq. The prosecution believed that the infrared research from Sloggett, which will be discussed later, and the evidence against Gant's disputed provenance stories were enough to prove that the works were suspect, if not complete forgeries. Gant's defence team obviously have a different interpretation of these works, presenting them all as being original works that Gant testified to having purchased from Whiteley's assistant Christian Quintus in 1988. This provenance story is firstly completely new, and secondly equally suspicious, as by this point in time Gant had declared bankruptcy twice to the Australian government. If he was sitting on 3 authentic Whiteleys this entire time, why did he not sell them to avoid declaring bankruptcy? And why were they not declared in his bankruptcy paperwork? I'm assuming this, I don't know, but in my non-legal opinion, that seems like a big stinking lie. The defence also argues that the works at Sadiq's workshop were copies, and that is what Morel was photographing, the production of copies, not forgeries. This statement, however, also poses more questions, as from discussions with other conservators and industry people that knew Sadiq, he was allegedly constantly complaining about his financial situation, so why would he waste his time and money on making copies? This theory also doesn't acknowledge why the supposed original works, the ones that Gant sold and that were now sat in the courtroom, were unknown to Whiteley experts, his records and of were until now, or where Sadiq's copies have ended up if the suspect works in the courtroom are the originals. Sadiq's defence continued their argument that the works he made were copies, and that once they left the studio he was not responsible for them, and that he did not benefit financially from the sales that Gant made. The first witness was Guy Morel, who discussed the photographic evidence he collected and his involvement in the authentication of the catalogue. In cross-examination, the defence tried to create further doubt by arguing that Sadiq was not worried about the storeroom's contents, as he was only making copies, evidenced by the key being in the lock in one of Morel's photos, and that he kept a spare key in his drawer next to the storeroom. Morel didn't deny this. In arguing against Morel's catalogue report, the defence tried to argue that it would have been difficult to find a modern printer to make the catalogue, in which Morel replied that no, it wouldn't be, as lithographic printing is still available. In questioning his research conclusion, that the catalogue was, quote, produced by 4-colour offset printing process to a high quality by Kenneth James Print in Melbourne, the production date was prior to 8th of November 1989, end quote, Morel replied that he was, quote, satisfied from what was relayed to me by the International College of Printing and Graphic Art experts in Brunswick, and I wrote that for the purpose for Gant and Sadiq, end quote. As part of their argument, the defence highlighted that Sadiq had asked for the report, not Gant, who had subsequently used it as provenance, and asked if Morel knew that there was an issue with the catalogue because Orange Lavender Bay was shown inside. However, Morel states that he knew, quote, because of the discussion Sadiq and Gant were having, end quote. In my opinion, the defence's questioning of Morel didn't really help their argument, and only linked Gant and Sadiq further together in the manufacture of a potentially fake provenance. I think that the only beneficial piece of information that came out of Morel's testimony, aside from what we heard in the committal hearing, was a clarifying question by the prosecution, where Morel asserted that he had not performed an age test on the catalogue. Although this highlights that Morel didn't do his paper research thoroughly, it also highlights that the provenance authenticity is unsubstantiated and that the paper test conducted by the auction house Deutscher and Hackett when Nestetsky tried to sell the work should be considered more strongly as proving the catalogue is either a fake provenance or a reprint of an original but unverified source material, and overall requires more research before it can be used as substantial provenance, at least in my opinion. Although the majority of his testimony had been restricted by the defence during pre-hearing discussions, Judge Wimhurst was next up to answer some questions. Firstly, he couldn't certify that the suspect works in the courtroom were definitely the ones he saw in the storeroom back in 2007, as he felt that they may have been smaller or slightly different colours, possibly as practice images or underpaintings for the finished works. However, his testimony did provide a timeline for the brown authenticated Whiteley, view from the sitting room window Lavender Bay, which arrived at the studio in early 2007 and was given to Wimhurst so that he could remove the frame. Apparently the frame was very rudimentary and had been nailed into the picture, a hallmark for Lichtenstein's frames, and afterwards he helped to carry it upstairs where it remained in one of the hallways as an inconvenience for a long time. Wimhurst also mentioned that during lunch with Gant and Sadiq, they mentioned that they bought the work in Sydney for one of their clients, which earned a headshake of disagreement from Sadiq in the courtroom. Overall, a rather bare testimony that didn't provide much evidence on either side, aside from a witness testimony of doors and works being delivered and the work that was performed on what may have become the alleged forgeries in the courtroom. The last testimony of day one was Richard Grasp, owner of M&J Quality Doors, who manufactured the doors that Richard Simon delivered to Sadiq. He testified that he recognised Simon's doors from Morel's photos because of what they were made from, the cross his company would put on them to say an order was finished, and the joins that were in some of the panels from the woods and finger joining technique that his company used. He also stated that whilst on a visit to the studio with Detective Stefanik, he saw the same paintings that were in the courtroom, and that Big Blue Lavender Bay had the cross mark and ventilation holes on the doors that his company used. In cross-examination, the defence asked if his company always used crosses, which they didn't, and Grasp clarified that these identifiers were probably not unique to their company within Melbourne or the rest of Australia. Day 2 was used entirely for the lawyers to argue about whether Simon's claims that he had made in the committal hearing about his conversation with Sadiq were substantial enough to be used in the court case. Day 3. Whilst the judge was considering if Simon's testimony was admissible, the jury heard from Ralph Hobbs, a Sydney-based art dealer who Archer had phoned in November of 2009 when Big Blue Lavender Bay had come up for sale. He said that once he saw the work, he became less excited, felt that it wasn't as bright as a real or good Whiteley, and that the provenance was not strong enough for him to be convinced of its authenticity. The defence questioned whether he would have bought the work if the provenance had satisfied him, in which Hobbs replied that maybe for the right price, but that $1 million Australian was too steep for a not great Whiteley. I think this testimony highlights quite a big point in forgery cases, in that if the provenance is good enough, some works that may seem a little fishy can still pass through the art market, which classifies them as lower quality or unusual but authentic works by the artist. Afterwards, Antonio Rincon, Lichtenstein's protégé frame maker, took the stand and confirmed his work history with Lichtenstein and when Sadiq ordered the frames. He says that after delivery, he never saw the frames again until he saw one of them on Big Blue Lavender Bay whilst it was under Sloggett's forensic testing. He stated that the frame currently on Orange Lavender Bay was not his, and explained that the minute difference between his and Lichtenstein's frame is how they are attached to the work. Lichtenstein's is nailed down, whilst Rincon's is removable due to a buffering piece between the frame and the artwork. Whilst explaining his process using pieces of frame, the defence tried to justify the authenticity of Big Blue Lavender Bay by highlighting that if it had nail marks, it had to have an original Lichtenstein frame on it previously. Unfortunately, this is a small thing that a forger could easily replicate to boost an authenticity claim by tricking forensic specialists, so I don't think this is valid proof on its own, but could be justified alongside other provenance and connoisseurship. The defence also asked if Rincon had viewed the two authentic works, Baudelaire's Drive and View from the Sitting Room Window Lavender Bay, that the defence suggested have Rincon's other two frames. Rincon replied that the police had never asked him to look at these works, and this discussion highlights one of the major issues I have with this case, the prosecution and the police's lack of thorough investigation into all leads, especially when they had over a year to prepare for this trial. Day 4. The day started with the judge ruling that Richard Simon's conversation with Sadiq was inadmissible, as he agreed with the arguments that the comment was in future tense and that it could be prejudicial as it could reference a painting that they were not being charged with. Due to this, Richard Simon's testimony to the jury was limited to him confirming the delivery of the items and discussing invoices, bank statements and reconciliation reports regarding Sadiq's door delivery. Although a blow to the prosecution, I can understand why this occurred, as this discussion becomes a he said debate that can't be verified without a third independent witness or physical proof like a letter or email. The next testimony came from Anita Archer, who discussed how she came into contact with Big Blue Lavender Bay through Gant, and how she had described the work to her buyer Andrew Preedham. In her testimony, she described the work as a trophy painting, which in the art world means that the work is so recognisably by an artist that people will know its origins immediately, which brings status and history to the work. This description is important in this context, because if these works are forgeries, Archer denoting it as a trophy work stakes her reputation as a dealer and auctioneer on the line, and highlights a wider discussion on the role of the connoisseur within art sales if their eye can be so wrong. Afterwards, Archer was asked about the aftermath of the report from Sloggett, in which she suggested that Big Blue Lavender Bay was not a Whiteley. In response, she reached out to Sadiq, who tried to argue that Sloggett's report was inaccurate, based on his cleaning and restoration work from the 10th of October 2007, a month before Gant showed her the work. He states that he had varnished the work, which is denied in Sloggett's forensic testing, detailing that he removed the original Lichtenstein frame, which was destroyed in the process, placed a new one by Rincon on the work, and that the paint on the frame was due to the varnish softening the paint and allowing it to be transferred. This statement gives a potential backstory to the Rincon frame order and why it is on the work instead of a Lichtenstein, but without the authentic frame or confirmation from Lichtenstein that he framed the work previously, it is hard to verify Sadiq's claims. In concluding her testimony, Archer stated that she still wasn't sure if the work was authentic or not, as her expertise did not lie within the forensic, framing or conservation field, which in my opinion is where more definitive evidence is likely to be discovered in testing the actual works and the provenance paperwork that support the authenticity claims for these works. Trial Week 2, Day 10. Skipping ahead to arrive at day 10 of trial, John Playfoot gave his testimony, originally confirming the story we already know, that Gant told him that Robert Lettet, his famous art collector client, owned Orange Lavender Bay, the same provenance story given to Archer for Big Blue Lavender Bay, and that Gant gave him a private affair catalogue after the sale as provenance for Nestetsky. Interestingly, Playfoot then delivers a blow to the prosecution, exposing that the catalogue was a digital copy, not an original, and that Nestetsky always knew this. Controversially, this catalogue being a digital work could further evidence the idea of it being a forgery, but unfortunately it also means that the digital copy can't be used to discredit the authenticity of Orange Lavender Bay, as if an original, verifiable catalogue can be found, Orange Lavender Bay could still be found to be authentic. However, this is where Playfoot's testimony takes a turn, as he begins to change his story from what he has told in previous hearings, by trying to discredit Andrew Crawford's opinion of the work, arguing that Crawford's eye was only good in some areas. The prosecution had the trial halted, and the jury dismissed to discuss the issue with the judge, who reminded them that Playfoot had divulged in pre-trial hearing that he had Alzheimer's. This was news to Kolchevich, who had not heard about this in the art market or from Playfoot when she interviewed him after the 2015 committal hearing. After the trial restarted, Playfoot also added that Crawford had confessed that he thought it was a scam. In cross-examination, Playfoot was asked if he had any issues with Orange Lavender Bay, which he stated that he loved when it first arrived, and that the only reason he brought in Chris Deutscher and Damien Hackett from Deutscher and Hackett Auction House and expert Jeffrey Smith to look at the work was for his wife's benefit, which the prosecution later discovered was due to the fact that she didn't trust Peter Gant, an understanding position if you ask me, that will be discussed in the next episode. After looking at the work, Smith highlighted 3 areas where the artist had changed his mind and made alterations, known as pentimento, which he emphasised as evidence against it being a fake. Playfoot and his wife also invited 2 Sotheby's employees to view it, who tried to sell it as sub-agents to another buyer. Rationally, after 5 experts showed confidence in the work, I think it is understandable why Playfoot felt reasonably confident that the work was real. When the defence asked Playfoot why he never told anybody that Gant was the seller, he argued that the art market is secretive and that if people know who the seller was, other dealers may have tried to undercut him by going directly to Gant to get a slice of a $100,000 plus commission. Next up in the trial came Andrew Crawford, who disclosed his view of the work. Originally, he felt that the work didn't look right, but that Playfoot had inferred a connection to Robert Letette's collection, leading him to feel slightly more confident in the work's authenticity. However, his suspicions soon increased again, evidenced by the letter he made Nastetsky sign against purchasing the work, when he couldn't find any records to authenticate the catalogue or consignment listing for Orange Lavender Bay, and got an unconvincing judgment from Wendy Whiteley about the work's authenticity. Respectfully, I'd argue that Crawford seems to be the only dealer that did the legwork to figure out if his client was being screwed, and tried to do everything he could to stop it from happening. Admittedly, if I had been in Crawford's shoes, I may have done all of this before showing the work to the client, but we all make mistakes, and if he trusted Playfoot's judgment and was unaware of Gant's involvement, it was probably difficult to doubt someone he viewed as a reliable and respectful source. The end of day 10 finished with Stephen Nastetsky, the buyer of Orange Lavender Bay, who explained the timeline of events from being shown the work in December 2009 to buying and trying to resell the work by March of 2010, discussing his difficulties with the auction house and gaining favourable opinions from industry experts like Wendy Whiteley to help prove its authenticity. In questioning, the defence argued that Playfoot did tell him that A Private Affair catalogue was a digital copy. Nastetsky stated that he didn't remember that conversation happening, but that it would have occurred 6 years ago, so there is a possibility that it did happen. Trial Week 3. The week began with Robert Letette, Gant's prized art collector client, who didn't know he was going to be called into the trial until just before the trial began. An interesting power play against Gant, or an afterthought by the prosecution, I wonder. Through their mutual interest in art, for over 30 years, Letette had loaned Gant money for real estate and art purchases, as well as storing art for Gant in his offices as a rotating display collection, like Gant's lawyer did with the missing artwork Lavender Bay Through the Window. Although Letette couldn't recall the particular paintings that were in his office before November of 2007, or if Orange Lavender Bay or Big Blue Lavender Bay had been there, he asserted he had never met Brett Whiteley or his studio assistant Christian Quintes, and never directly bought either artwork, like Gant had been claiming as the true provenance story until the beginning of the jury trial. For Gant's defence, as Letette's testimony throws increased doubt on the provenance story that was used to sell the work originally, and by association, the authenticity of the works, the defence tried to clarify how Gant and Letette's client relationship worked. Letette explained that they had a fluid ownership of the works, in that Gant could present the works and sell them on Letette's behalf, but that if a loan went bad, he took full ownership and could resell the work to get his money back. In response, Gant's team tried to argue that he was just heightening the provenance by signing the authentication statement in Letette's name to make it sell better, and tried to argue that Letette was not as involved as he claimed, citing a separate court battle during 2010, in which View from the Sitting Room Window Lavender Bay was discussed, but that during this trial, Letette couldn't remember financing it in March of 2007. Could this mean that Letette is not as valuable a source as he first appears? Largely, I'd argue Letette's testimony is truthful, and that depending on how many art pieces he had with Gant, it may have been difficult for him to remember every piece that he owned. I would also argue that the court case over custody happened 6 years prior, and may not have been the only court case he had at that time, let alone in that year, if he was a multimillionaire art dealer and businessman. Next up came Stephen Drake, the engineer that purchased Orange Lavender Bay in August of 2013 for the severely discounted price of $122,000 Australian dollars, which is all he had, and not even the original sum of $300,000 Australian dollars that Gant had wanted. According to Drake, he had bought the work through Playfoot's company Galleria Moderna because he liked it, and because Gant had said it was authentic, using Nastetsky's purchase as provenance. The work remained with Drake until the police seized it in June of 2014 when they raided Sadiq and Gant's homes. According to Drake, after the seizure, Gant provided him with a colour photocopy of A Private Affair catalogue and Morel's report as further provenance, unknown to Drake previously, which seems like odd timing in my opinion. If the police had not seized it, would Gant have ever passed it along? From Drake's testimony, the jury discovered that he was also interested in purchasing Big Blue Lavender Bay in October of 2010, once he had viewed and obtained an independent evaluation, and that Gant may have been setting him up to buy the work through Archer so that she could get the money to repay Pridham, rather than Gant having to hand over the money himself. In cross-examination, the defence tried to remove one of Gant's financial advantage by deception charges by arguing that Drake would have known it was not authentic in the art market's opinion from the media coverage. However, Drake argued that he took a gamble buying Orange Lavender Bay, hoping it would be rectified as an authentic work, and that although he knew it possibly wasn't real, he had been repeatedly told it was real by Gant. Although I'm not a lawyer, let alone an Australian lawyer, I would argue that from this statement alone, if Gant was telling Drake that it was real and made a profit from his purchase, that still comes under the financial advantage by deception charge, if its authenticity within the art world can't be confirmed. Afterwards came Luke Doyle, a librarian at the National Gallery of Victoria who was tasked with trying to find the A Private Affair catalogue within the archives and databases of Australian libraries. Doyle states that he found no record of the A Private Affair catalogue, but had no issue finding 3 other Peter Gant fine art catalogues from 1988 to 1999, which were readily available in libraries across Australia. The defence tried to assert that there are gaps in the system, as libraries collected art catalogues passively from galleries passing them on, or from dealers, curators and artists sending them in, and that due to this exhibition being cancelled and nobody aside from Gant and his staff having access to the catalogue, this may be the reason why the A Private Affair catalogue doesn't feature. Kolchevich develops on this point in her book, wondering when Gant started saying that it didn't go ahead, as when she was first writing on Orange Lavender Bay back in July of 2010, Nastetsky had told her that the catalogue was very rare and that only 2 copies existed, one in the State Library of Victoria and the other in the National Gallery of Victoria. Nothing about it not happening. Did Gant use it as a cover story to stop others trying to research for the catalogue and investigate him further? Or is it true, and this is how we get gaps in the provenance trail as unimportant works move to unimportant locations until it becomes critical or infamous later down the line? After an unconvincing testimony at the committal hearing, at least in my opinion, Rosemary Milburn was brought back to reiterate what works she signed in and how and what Gant's records showed. Milburn timelines that the consignment book was signed in June of 1988 when the supposed Whiteleys had been sent to Gant's gallery, and that Milburn was reintroduced to the records 26 years later in Gant's solicitor's office to see if she remembered writing the consignment note, which she says she did. She describes all 3 works arrived via Grace Fine Art, a premier art moving company, in large wooden crates in bubble wrap from Christian Quintus, Brett Whiteley's assistant. She states in her testimony that she remembered the 3 large works, all Sydney Harbour views in either orange, blue or lavender. When asked about the shipment of 21 other paintings that arrived the same day, Milburn says that she can remember a smaller black and white Whiteley and a fair weather work being part of the collection, but none of the others. With this revelation, the prosecution asked where all of these 24 works were stored when the gallery only had a 4x4 foot room storeroom and didn't regularly receive 24 items in one day, in which Milburn replied that they were piled about the place to accommodate the large delivery. The prosecution followed up by asking about her interview with Detective Stefanik in September of 2014, when he showed her the consignment note and pictures of the 3 Whiteleys, in which she stated that she could not definitively confirm that those artworks were the ones that she had signed for. I think this is the most telling part of her testimony, as not only were these works supposedly seen over 25 years ago, they were wrapped in timber frames and bubble wrap, which realistically would obscure the visual of the painting. In cross-examination, the defence made Milburn go through the handwriting on the consignment book on several pages, including the one from the 28th of June 1988, and confirmed that it was hers, and asked her clarifying questions like if she helped bring the works in, which she didn't because they were too heavy, if she could see the works through the timber and bubble wrap, which she states she could, but I remain sceptical, and where she found the names to write them down for the consignment note, which she believes was either read to her or were on the paintings already. Unsurprisingly, I remain unconvinced by Milburn's testimonies, as her explanation of the consignment book was confusing and contradictory, and in her jury trial explanation, it could be interpreted that she included Christian Quintas in to follow Gant's new defence strategy that he had owned the works the entire time. Overall, I'm not convinced. The last 2 individuals of the day were Andrew Pridham and Guy Angwin, who both discussed the timeline of events that led to them receiving their individual alleged forgeries, Big Blue Lavender Bay and Lavender Bay Through the Window. Following on from the timeline of episode 1, Pridham discusses how he raised concerns with Archer in July of 2010 about the provenance for Big Blue Lavender Bay, who told him that she could see no issues with the provenance. In response, on the 9th of August, Archer told Prudhomme that she met with Letette's agent, i.e. Gant, and that his money would be refunded and the artwork would be inspected by Robyn Sloggett like he had asked for previously. Prudhomme was surprised, as he thought she was dealing with Litette directly, and became concerned when she confirmed that Gant was the agent. Several months later in December, the idea was introduced that someone might buy the painting to refund his money, which we can assume was Stephen Drake, but Prudhomme went against the idea, arguing that he didn't want the work sold to somebody else for them to be potentially scammed just to get his money back. In return, the defence tried to argue that from these statements, it could be presented that Archer was the main perpetrator in this case for persuading him to buy the work, not Gant, and that Gant made no misrepresentations in buying it for investment. In Angwin's testimony, he discussed his history with Gant and the terms of the loan, where Angwin would have given back the painting Lavender Bay through the window when he received his money from Gant. Unfortunately, the media stories surrounding Gant led Angwin to give the work back, and it was picked up by someone who worked for Gant and sent to John Ribbons, Gant's previous attorney. This caused an uproar with the defence, who threatened to have the jury disbanded, as Ribbons was now working for Sadiq, and they felt that it may prejudice the jury regarding Gant and Sadiq's relationship, as well as infer that Gant needed an attorney for previous interactions with the law. Afterwards, the defence then tried to remove another of Gant's charges for obtaining the $950,000 Australian dollar loan from Angwin through financial deception by using the painting as collateral, as they argued that the loan was actually against Gant's Anglesey home and that the painting was just a sweetener, not actual collateral for the debt. I disagree, as Gant still hasn't repaid Angwin the money on that loan, consequently losing his family home, and I would argue he is entitled to something from Gant, whether that's a full loan repayment or the house as collateral, but that's a different court case altogether. Trial Day 13. Midway through week 3 of the trial, Brett Lichtenstein took the stand and discussed his involvement in the framing business and his interaction with both dealers and investors in the alleged forgery sales. He categorically states that he never told Archer it was his frame on Big Blue Lavender Bay, and was able to confirm that for himself when he saw it under Sloggett's supervision in 2011, as the frame was made with unaged wood and looked like it was made in the last 5 years, making it too fresh to be his original frame. He had the same feeling when he saw Orange Lavender Bay and Lavender Bay through the window, as he didn't recognise the works or frames, and was surprised that there was no perspex covering Orange Lavender Bay, which was typical for something of that size. In cross-examination, the defence reiterated some points, like the blue paint on the frame of Big Blue Lavender Bay was due to a recent varnishing, which Lichtenstein argued was false, as there would be a layer of varnish between the paint and the frame, and that the picture didn't look like it had been varnished. Although they suggested that the xylene mixed into the varnish could have softened the paint, Lichtenstein again refuted this as unlikely to happen with aged paint, before the defence descended into rather a weak argument of, well, you weren't there and you didn't do it, so what do you know? Ignoring Lichtenstein's decades of experience as a framer interacting with varnished works on the regular. The rest of Lichtenstein's time on the stand was spent discussing Brett Whiteley's working relationship with him and whether heroin affected his painting. Although Lichtenstein tried to argue that Whiteley didn't need to be selling works for heroin, as he had money and that his good or bad days were not dependent on heroin but just on how he was performing as an artist, the defence tried to discredit his argument by asking why he and Whiteley fell out over money, a matter of principle as Lichtenstein refers to it, if Whiteley had so much money, and argued that Whiteley's painting style may have been more jagged and required more pre-planning in comparison to his natural flow due to his dependence on heroin. Alongside this, the defence tried to use Lichtenstein's time to set up to discredit Wendy Whiteley later, staging her issues with drugs, money and her time separated from Brett during their divorce. End of Day 13 and Day 14 were dedicated to Robyn Sloggett's forensic evidence testimony. Using a laser pointer, Sloggett dissected Orange Lavender Bay, highlighting points of identification that she felt proved it was not an authentic Whiteley. She emphasised that the water looked flat and still, rather than swirling in currents like water in Whiteley's other works. The boats are outlined and filled in, like painting by numbers, which Whiteley didn't do. That the trees were flat and decorative, again unlike other Whiteleys, that it lacked space and perspective for the viewer, which Whiteley was conscious of in his works, and that the palette was limited, especially in watery surfaces, as Whiteley used varnishes, layers of paint and drip lines to make shimmery watery surfaces that are beloved in his other works. In critiquing Big Blue Lavender Bay, she argued that firstly, when she removed the frame, there was no nail holes or other attachment to the painting supports for the frame, making it unlikely that an original Lichtenstein frame had been on the work. When it came to the aesthetic contents of the painting, she highlighted that the bird was badly painted, which is unlike Whiteley, as he is renowned for his birds, and even has an entire collection dedicated to them. There is again no sense of perspective, and that it had many common motifs of the artist, but that they had not been applied properly, in her opinion. At this point, I personally begin to take issue with the judge, as he joins the defence in dismissing Sloggett's connoisseurship, arguing that it relied too much on subjective discussions of the artist's intentions, not on logical facts which are necessary in court proceedings. Although the art market has a lower bar for evidence when proving a fact in comparison with the court of law, I think that to completely dismiss Sloggett's testimony because it is down to interpretation disregards her as an informed expert on the subject, who is trusted for her nuanced approach and expertise, in a similar vein to how the court relies on forensic pathologists in a more complex murder trial. To try and destroy Sloggett's arguments, the defence argued that she was influenced by masterpiece syndrome, which arises when the art market refuses to believe a work is by an artist because it is not to their usual standard, so may reject the work as a fake or denote it to a student rather than the master. They evidence their claim by emphasising that Sloggett only compared these artworks to two of Whiteley's most beloved works, which she argued was due to the very limited number of securely authenticated Lavender Bay artworks from 1988 that she was able to compare to. They also tried to argue that she was prejudiced towards the artworks because she believed they were fakes when she first saw them. However, all Sloggett did was follow her hypothesis, and if she was a moral scientist, she would have reported back her findings no matter the outcome, as both are positive in the end, as she either outs two fakes or helps to authenticate two new works for the oeuvre. To further ignore Sloggett's findings, the defence tried to argue that the catalogue for Orange Lavender Bay was possibly strong evidence and would outweigh Sloggett's research anyway. Firstly, in the art market at least, this is not true, as a strong provenance trail alone doesn't mean that the artwork presented isn't a forgery or a copy, as they can be made for non-illegal reasons, like insurance or display purposes. Secondly, as Sloggett argues, one catalogue that has not been verified outside of Peter Gant and his friends is not substantial enough evidence to fulfill the section of provenance, and that provenance is easy enough to fake if a forger is really dedicated to the scam. Even at the end of her sparring with the defence, where I felt she made some very credible points, the judge still disliked Sloggett's statements, as he felt that the whole thing was conjecture and not usable in court proceedings. Trial Day 15. Day 15 began with more forensic science, courtesy of Sloggett's employee Vanessa Kowalski, to discuss the underpaintings in Orange Lavender Bay and Big Blue Lavender Bay that were captured using infrared technology, which they believed corresponded with works shown in Morel's photographs from the storeroom. Kowalski also argued there is too much underdrawing for these to be Whiteley's, from what art market research at the time suggested, pointing to the forensic side, deeming both as forgeries. In the strangest argument I've ever heard, the defence tried to diminish Kowalski's research by arguing that anyone with an infrared lens on their camera could see the same thing, which is categorically false, as the forensic specialist uses a much higher strength specialist camera for infrared photographs. Continuing the strange line of questioning, the defence posited to Kowalski that as a conservator, if she was making a copy of a painting, would she make an infrared copy of the work first? Understandably, Kowalski gave a resounding no, because as a conservator, like Sadiq, her job was not to make copies of works, but to conserve originals and to test the authenticity of originals. Trying to minimise the integrity of Sloggett's team, the defence questions if they had done infrared studies on other secured works by Whiteley for comparison, which they had not. The defence also tried to clarify if Big Blue Lavender Bay had been varnished, like Sadiq claimed, or if it was unvarnished, like Sloggett claimed. Kowalski states that they did not detect any varnish in their preliminary report investigations, which only required them to shine a UV light over the work to look for varnish, which came back negative. But she did concede that if the new varnish that Sadiq supposedly used had UV stabilisers in it, then the varnish would not have shown in that preliminary test. However, she also highlighted that the xylene in the varnish, depending on how carefully it was done, wouldn't soften the paint, which further backs the prosecution's claims that the paint on Big Blue Lavender Bay's frame was from fresh paint and thus is a forgery. The last big testimony from this case came from Wendy Whiteley, as an expert in Brett Whiteley's art practice and for her opinion on the two works. Firstly, she states that Brett didn't use underdrawings, which isn't strictly true from research carried out by the Art Gallery of New South Wales, but it did show that the underdrawing technique he did use was more fluid than the blocky technique seen in Sloggett and Kowalski's infrared images. Regarding the two works specifically, she reiterates her interaction with them and that on first impressions, she believed they are fakes, especially as she had never seen them previously at exhibitions and weren't proposed for the Whiteley retrospective in 1995, which seems odd if they were in Robert Lettet or Gant's possession, depending on which provenance story is to be believed. However, Wendy does admit that it is not the first time she has been wrong about a Whiteley, as she didn't think View from the Sitting Room Window Lavender Bay was a Whiteley when she saw it at a house auction in 1998, until she was shown a photograph of Brett stood next to the work in his studio. The defence used this, alongside their addiction argument that they had set up during Lichtenstein's testimony, to argue about the impact that heroin had on his artistic ability, and question Wendy about an interview years prior where she stated that his addiction had impacted some of his works, making them lifeless and dead, although she corrected that she meant it had ruined his potential at life, not necessarily his work. Using another quote, in which Wendy stated that all Lavender Bay paintings by Whiteley were actually pretty good, which the defence argued contradicted her statements about the works being bad hair day Whiteleys, Wendy stressed that this would still apply if they were proven to be Whiteleys. The defence tried to further their argument through undermining Wendy's relationship with Brett during this period, emphasising that she had been replaced as his muse by Janice Spencer, his girlfriend at the time, when these works were allegedly produced. As part of their argument, the defence made the mistake of handing over an evidence booklet of images to Wendy, asking her to only look at the first picture, showing underdrawings from the authentic Whiteley in Gant's possession, View from the Sitting Room Window, Lavender Bay. Unfortunately for the defence, Wendy did not follow their instructions and flipped through the booklet to see all of Morel's images of the alleged forgeries, or copies if we believe Sadiq's defence, being made, leading her to toy with the defence barrister about there being a lot of underdrawing in the other works. Trial Week 4. The penultimate week of the trial started with the judge and prosecution arguing about delays in tracking down Jeremy James for his testimony, as he had been in the US with his family at Disney World, which was clearly more important than testifying in a multi-million-dollar fraud investigation, alongside the lag in editing Gant's police interview for the jury. Afterwards, the judge tried to remove the charge against Gant over the lone painting Lavender Bay Through the Window, arguing it was too weak and there was no case. This spurred the defence to announce that they would be challenging the rest of the charges using a Prasad Direction, which gives, quote, an invitation to the jury to find the accused not guilty at the end of the Crown case without hearing any further evidence, end quote. Although originally meant to be used sparingly by judges who felt that a jury may not have enough evidence to find the defendants guilty beyond reasonable doubt, the option has now been largely removed from the Australian court system unless it is for a simpler case with only one defendant. If the jury chooses to follow the Prasad Direction, the defendants are acquitted, and if not, the trial continues, but may put either side at a disadvantage if they have no further evidence to present to the jury. Although Kolsovich does not state what happens, Detective Sergeant James MacDonald gives a testimony after this discussion, so I presume that the Prasad Direction was either not given by the judge or rejected by the jury. Discussing the police investigation, Detective Sergeant James MacDonald is asked by the defence during cross-examination about a phone call between him and Guy Morel on the 21st of September 2010 about Gant's catalogue that he had examined. In Morel's opinion, he felt that it was genuine, and that he believed it would throw a spanner in the works for Sloggett's findings, as if the provenance is true, then the artwork is more likely to be authentic as well. In further questioning, MacDonald states that he couldn't recall if he had made further inquiries into Morel's report or on the catalogue, which in my opinion is either down to shoddy police work or a lack of knowledge for the intricacies for a crime like art forgery and how to tackle it effectively. Six weeks after the trial had started, the jury returned to submit their guilty verdict on the 12th of May 2016 for Iman Sadiq and Peter Gant on 2 counts of obtaining financial advantage by deception and on 1 count of attempting to do so, giving their verdict, quote, in the absence of even the slightest bit of evidence that what Sadiq had produced at Victoria Art Conservation were copies of the paintings in court, end quote, stating that the defence's story was fanciful. Although this may seem like a positive result for the prosecution, this is where the trials go dramatically downhill, as the defence states that they will appeal the case, and Justice Croucher, who seemed very unsure about the jury's judgment, allowed for both men to remain out on bail whilst a plea hearing was being prepped and performed. 2 months later, on the 28th of July 2016, the plea hearing got underway, to try to keep the two men out of jail whilst an appeal was lodged and heard. Justice Croucher stated that he liked both works but didn't understand their pricing, which is understandable for someone not experienced with the art market, and that he felt that it was odd that it took 7 years to investigate the fake artworks. In response, the prosecution argued that it's only Australia's second art fraud case, that these crimes are also incredibly hard to detect and prosecute, but that shouldn't affect their sentencing because Gant and Sadiq's crime is still very serious. In the plea hearing, character witnesses were brought forward to discuss how wonderful and giving both Sadiq and Gant were to the art community, and how much talent would be wasted if they were to end up in jail. You know, in a similar vein to when college athletes get accused of rape and everyone starts ranting and raving about how they'll lose out on a successful career and their teams will be at a disadvantage if they're sent to prison. During these conversations, there is a mention of Sadiq's mental health at the thought of going to prison, which has unsurprisingly sent him into a depression and made him potentially suicidal. Although I can understand the judge's concern, and that if he is lenient with Sadiq, he should be lenient with Gant, according to Kolchevich, another report stated that Sadiq apparently had not stated a specific plan on how he would commit suicide, aside from eating lots of buttery foods, with no care for the consequences to his health, which is probably the mildest threat of suicide I have ever heard of. To round off the sympathy campaign for Sadiq, this statement was presented at the hearing, declaring, quote, "Essentially, Mr. Sadiq claims that while he made copies of original Brett Whiteley paintings, this is not a criminal act. However, he denies selling them or benefiting financially from the copies in any way. He described a version of events in which his generous and somewhat naive nature was taken advantage of by others. Although I may agree with this presentation of events, I feel like I need more information, such as a view of Sadiq's financial records and other business dealings with Gant, before I could determine that he had not benefited from Gant's association." On the 9th of September 2016, Justice Croucher postponed sentencing for the second time, deciding on having a mention instead. However, at the same time, the Crown prosecution had made 2 compensation orders against the accused, one for $2.5 million Australian dollars to Andrew Preedham, and a second one of $990,000 Australian dollars to John Playfoot, which needed to be addressed by the judge, and were seen as a possible reason why he had postponed the case. 3 days later, the mention occurred, where the judge confirmed that he needed time to process the compensation orders, so hadn't made a decision on the sentencing. During this mention, he listed the 9 questions he had about the orders, mainly, who should he make the orders out to when there was no evidence that Sadiq had received any money from Preedham or Nastetsky? To what extent should he be inquiring into the financial circumstances of the accused? And 3, why hadn't the compensation orders been raised at the plea hearing? A month later, on the 12th of October, the prosecution removed the compensation orders so that the judge could go ahead with sentencing, leading to Preedham receiving no compensation, as his insurance didn't cover forgeries and his civil case against Archer was dropped in 2013, and leaving Playfoot nearly $1 million in debt to Gant after repaying Nastetsky. Although the court seized $1.2 million Australian dollars worth of property and assets from Sadiq, whilst Gant declared himself bankrupt again, the judge didn't feel comfortable making Sadiq pay them if he didn't profit from them and was unaware they would be sold at $2.5 million Australian dollars. The judge also didn't feel comfortable in declaring Playfoot a victim and therefore entitled to money back through the courts from the accused. 3 weeks later, on the 4th of November, Justice Croucher read a 40-page document discussing sentencing reasons, arguing to put the sentences on hold until applications for bail were heard and determined by the Court of Appeal. The sentences he was proposing for Gant and Sadiq, who had been found guilty of a fraud amounting to $4.5 million Australian dollars, were as follows. For Gant, a 5-year jail sentence with a non-parole period of 2.5 years, and for Sadiq, a 3-year sentence with 10 months to be served immediately and 26 months to be suspended for 3 years. The judge also threw both compensation claims out of the criminal trial and told them to pursue their case through the civil courts. However, Justice Croucher felt that the jury had got it wrong, as Kolchevich summarises that, quote, "On the one hand, he was outlining the seriousness of their offences, describing them as cynical and calculated instances of fraud and attempted fraud. On the other, insisting that there was a powerful argument that the guilty verdicts were unsafe." End quote. She argues that both Gant and Siddiq seem to have made a positive impression on him as good characters, and so he stayed the sentence until the appeal was finally heard on the 27th of April 2017. At the appeal, the court judge acquitted Gant and Siddiq on everything, centering his argument on the evidence of Rosemary Milburn, Gant's assistant, and Jeremy James, the catalogue photographer. He argued that the prosecution's argument that the paintings could not have been created in 1988 was completely undermined by these two witnesses and the supporting documents of the catalogue and invoice book that were left unchallenged in court. On the 8th of May 2017, both men were fully acquitted as they felt that the jury could not find either of them guilty beyond reasonable doubt based on the evidence that was brought forward by the prosecution to prove guilt. So, let's decompress and come to some conclusions about this messy end to a very inexperienced case. As an outsider of the Australian law system, but as someone who reads about forgery cases on the regular, I have a few comments I want to make. Firstly, I think that the police and prosecution in this case were underfunded, uninterested, and inexperienced in handling a case like this. Fraud cases globally are very difficult to bring to court and convict, and art fraud is even harder due to the intellectual separation of the art world from the real world. In my perfect world, I would be giving everyone involved within that trial, the judges, prosecution, defence, the jury, an art market introductory lecture, where the 3 points of authentication are discussed and explored, how forgeries work in the art market, and similar questions, so that everyone had a baseline understanding of how the complex world works and how criminals work within it. Secondly, the level of misogyny in this case, which I feel is better highlighted in Kolchevich's book, which I highly recommend reading, makes me feel weird about this case. The way that Sloggett was spoken to about her findings, the way that Siddiq interacted with her during the case, and the way that Wendy Whiteley especially was dismissed by the judge in defence because, in their opinion, she was only an expert because she slept with Brett Whiteley, diminishes the expertise that both these women have within their own fields. Sloggett is the head of a research institute within one of Australia's biggest cities, and in my opinion gave great critical authentication information that probably would have been accepted in the art market as fact. Wendy, similarly, did not just sleep with Brett Whiteley, she was his wife for decades, his studio assistant, and one of his biggest supporters. My main question from these lines of questioning is whether the judge in defence would have asked these questions or made certain statements if they were both men, or would they have been just as critical. Overall, I can't make a conclusion to say that I think these works are fake or real. I'm not a Whiteley expert, and I've never seen any of his works, let alone these works, in person. However, I think it would be hypocritical of me to say that I didn't have reservations about the authenticity of these works, and I think the prosecution did not investigate enough avenues to make a compelling argument, even if they had questioned back on some of the evidence that they let go unhindered. For example, if Gant had these paintings when he declared himself bankrupt, did he declare them? Does that put him forward for other crimes if he was hiding millions of dollars worth of art from the government tax investigators? Where are these copies that Siddiq made if these works are the originals? Where is the paper trail for their sale, and can we see them to compare? Why was there a private affair catalogue and the consignment catalogue never tested again by Sloggett or a third party to check their authenticity? I'm sorry if I've left you with more questions than answers, but let me know on social media or down in the comments on the YouTube video any of your thoughts about this work, as I would love to talk to you all about it. I will see you at the end of the month hopefully, as I have a new job, so we'll be working on this around that, for a deep dive into Peter Gant in a series that I'm thinking of calling Art Market Assholes, but will that open me up to being sued? I guess we shall see. See you then, and I hope you've enjoyed this second part of the trilogy.